G'day folks, how you going? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, then a special good day to you. I hope you hang around for a little while. Now I'm going to start a new series which is going to be looking at easy four-wheel drive weekend trips out of Perth. Now the idea of these videos is to show people that either aren't familiar with four-wheel driving or want to give this camping in the bush idea a bit of a go to see if they like it. It's all about getting your four-wheel drive daily driver home at the end of a trip without any broken bits. Now the first video is looking at a trip from Perth to Albany, and as you'll see it's been broken up into multiple trips, but I'll tell you more about that in the video. So let's have a look at the start of the Mundal Track. A lot of people have a four-wheel drive, and a lot of people like to go out adventure, climb mountains and cross rivers that look like oceans. But for a lot of us, our four-wheel drive is our daily driver, and we can't afford to go out and potentially damage it and pay for the repairs afterwards. Now if you have a look around on YouTube, you'll see there's a heap of channels out there that are dedicated to the more extreme four-wheel driving. Now don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with that. I watch some of those and quite enjoy watching that sort of thing. But for a lot of us, we don't want to do that type of four-wheel driving. In this series, we're going to be focusing more on the relaxed and fun short four-wheel drive trips out of Perth. You'll be able to do a little bit of camping and it won't cost you an arm and a leg or risk any damage to your vehicles. These are practical, fun getaways that everyone with a four-wheel drive will be able to enjoy. And the first one we're going to be looking at is called the Mundal Track. The Mundal Track is a track that travels from Mundaring and goes all the way through to Albany on the south coast. But we're not going to be doing the Albany Highway blacktop all the way down to Albany. We're going to be doing the dirt tracks that travel through the amazing Darling Escarpment. Now this track's put together by the WA Four-Wheel Drive Association, and it's perfect for the people that would like to experience the bush without the extreme four-wheel driving. But it's important that before you go, you check the websites, and I'll put some links down below. Check the details, because this track can actually change from time to time when tracks are closed for various different reasons. The association will actually go back out there again and find new tracks. So it's important that you check the websites for the up-to-date information of the tracks that you can actually travel on. Now the beauty of this drive is that most of it is on well-maintained gravel tracks or fire breaks. So you could do it in a two-wheel drive, but it would need to be a high clearance vehicle to be able to access some of the areas. And keep in mind too, as you get further down south, you might have some small water crossings as well. as I mentioned, this trip starts at Mundaring Weir, and I did a video on Mundaring Weir a few years ago on the weir and the pipeline to Kalgoorlie and the man that dreamt it all up. So I'll put a link in the description and a link up here as well if you want to go and have a look at that. Now where I am now is probably the first official campsite that you could camp in if you wanted to leave Perth maybe Friday night. We're only about half an hour from Mundaring Weir, so it'd be a nice little convenient campsite to get into here. And it's important that we use the official campsites, not just any spot you find on the side of the road, because if you do that, we may lose the chance of actually having access into these places. There's a lot of this stuff happening on the east coast, and we don't want it to happen here in Western Australia. Now this area that we're in here, it's called Barton's Mill. Barton's Mill was a miller that opened up here in the early 1900s. There was an abundant amount of jarrah and hardwoods all through this area, and this was a good spot to put a mill. With the growing Perth and surrounding area, they needed all hardwoods. So this operated here until 1937. By then it was then sold on to a company called Millers, who was kind of like the Bunnings of today, and they closed it down in 1937. Now in 1942 the government took over this area and turned it into a prison called Barton's Mill Prison, because the military took over the Fremantle prison. Now this bit's a little bit confusing because I wasn't aware that the military took over Fremantle prison, but I know they took over the Fremantle asylum. So whether they initially had people out of the asylum camped out here, maybe that's where that story comes into it. But they nevertheless, the story goes that the military took over the prison, and the prisoners came out here, and this was a prison right up until 1987 when they closed it down and pretty much ripped everything out. So there's not a lot left anymore. Some foundations here. Now I don't know whether these foundations are from the prison or from the mill. I'm kind of going to guess possibly the prison itself, but it's a big area, and it'd make a pretty good camping area. You can get in a two-wheel drive, but it needs to be high clearance because the road coming is a little bit rutted, and so you need to have a bit of clearance to come in. So if you've got a 4-Cortina, don't bring it out here. So that's our first stop. We're going to head off now and just take a casual drive through the hills and see what else we can find. Depending on the time of the year, travelling through the Australian bush reveals an incredible display of wildflowers. On our trip, I saw some pink flowers, oranges and red ones scattered across the landscape. Now, one of the other things you've got to consider, depending on what time of the year you do this run, is bushfires, whether they're wildfires or they're preventative burns. This one was probably a preventative burn because it's looks like it wasn't done too long ago. So in the case of what I did, I contacted the DPAW, the Forestry Department here in Western Australia, and asked them if there was any burns going to be happening along the route that we were travelling. And they sent me an email back and said, as far as they're aware, that there isn't any burns, but local governments also have their own sort of thing as well. But at least I generally know that there shouldn't be any burns along our route while we're travelling on it. It's lunchtime and we've found the perfect spot to stop. It's so peaceful here, just a gentle breeze rustling through the trees and the occasional distant bird call. A quiet moment like this makes an ideal break in the journey. We've stopped at this little spot here, not only just because it was a nice little place to have lunch, and they actually had toilets here which weren't actually listed on anything that I've got, so it was nice to have some toilets, even though they're only drop toilets, and a nice little camp spot up here as well, but it's not an official camp spot, so probably best if we didn't use it, but it's a nice looking spot anyway. The reason why we stopped here was because in the 1940s, during the Second World War, in this area here was a POW camp. Mostly Italians that were captured during the African conflict. Throughout the southwest there were a number of places where they had put in POW camps. Out in the middle of nowhere, nothing but the bush, probably to help to discourage people from possibly escaping. The camp operated under the supervision of the Australian military personnel, but the Italian prisoners were given a significant degree of autonomy within the camp. Many prisoners developed good relationships with the local community, and it was not uncommon for them to work on local farms or in businesses as part of their labour duties. These prisoners were often well regarded by the local population, especially compared to prisoners from other nations, as Italians were seen as less ideologically aligned with the cause. This is what's left of the front gate of the camp. There's not much left here now, but a few foundations from some of the buildings and a few signs to say what was there. Coming up ahead, you can catch sight of the Serpentine Dam in the distance, a reminder of the impressive engineering that keeps Perth supplied with fresh water. It feels like a hidden world out here, just an hour from the city but surrounded by nature at its best. Back in the late 1950s, Perth was on the brink of an industrial growth, and it was going to turn the city into a modern bustling town. Down the hill down here is Kwinana. At the time that was a small industrial area but growing very rapidly, and they were going to be needing a lot of water. The dam's capacity is 138 million kilolitres, which makes it one of the largest water suppliers for Perth. Planners saw the potential for the Serpentine River as a major water supply source, and so began the Serpentine scheme. This project aimed to increase storage capacity in the hills by 170%. This scale made it the biggest construction project undertaken by the then Water Authority since 1940, when Canning Dam was completed. After leaving Serpentine Dam, we're on the blacktop for a while until the road once again turns to gravel. This here is the North Dandalup Dam, and just down that way, probably about 40 kilometres or so just that way, is the desalination plant in Kwinana. And a lot of the water that they desalinate comes up here and is stored in this dam. The dam was constructed using a rock-filled embankment with a central clay core. This design combines compacted rock and earth materials around a clay centre, which creates a sturdy, waterproof yet flexible structure. It's not that we're doing a dam tour, it's just that we have so many dams in the hills to provide water to Perth, and this route goes past so many of them. Why not drop in? So here's one more. South Dandalup Dam was constructed between 1970 and 71. It's another of the bigger dams servicing Perth and surrounds. On a good day, you might have a chance to see plenty of wildlife, including kangaroos, possums and heaps of birds such as the black cockatoo or kookaburra. One of the notable and rather sobering sights here, and at all Perth dams, is the line in the surrounding bushland where tall vegetation suddenly gives way to shorter plants. This natural marker shows the difference between the dam's highest water levels and where it currently stands, a stark reminder of how long it's been since the dams were full. It really highlights the ongoing impact of reduced rainfall and drought, emphasising the vulnerability of our water sources. After leaving South Dandalup Dam, we head south towards Dwellingup, following the road for a little while before taking a turn that leads us into something a bit more rugged. Tracks that start to feel like they're made for a four-wheel drive adventure. Don't worry though, while the track is narrower and a bit more challenging than what we've been on so far, it's still very manageable. Just enough to give a sense of adventure without being too rough. So it's a great spot to get a feel for reading the road and planning your line to avoid any tricky spots. It's all part of the experience, taking your time, keeping an eye on the terrain and choosing the best path as you go. From here, we begin a steady downhill journey towards the creek at the bottom. The descent is slow and a bit rutted, perfect for sharpening those driving skills without things getting too intense. Tonight we'll be camping at the Marrinup campsite. The surrounding Jarrah forests were a valuable source of timber, which was used for buildings, railway construction and export. Marrinup grew to accommodate the workers who felled the trees and processed the timber into local sawmills. The town had all the typical infrastructure of a small working community, including housing for the workers, a general store and other essential services. It thrived during the early parts of the 20th century when the demand for timber was high. However, like most timber towns in the region, Marrinup's fortunes were closely tied to the timber industry. As the industry modernised and began to rely on fewer workers, the need for small timber towns like Marrinup diminished. By the mid-20th century, the town was in decline and many residents moved away as employment opportunities dwindled. Marrinup was severely affected by the devastating 1961 Dwellingup bushfires, which destroyed much of the area, including parts of Marrinup. After the fires, there was very little effort in rebuilding the town, and it was effectively abandoned. The other significant event in the town's history was built up here. Another POW camp was built here in 1943, and this housed again mostly Italians and a few German prisoners. We're here in the locality of a little town that used to be here, a little logging town called Marrinup. It's just out of Dwellingup, and this is the location of another prisoner of war camp back in 1943. This one had Italian prisoners and also some German prisoners. The camp was relatively basic, consisting of wooden huts for the prisoners and barbed wire fencing surrounding the perimeter. Despite being prisoners, many of the POWs had a relatively peaceful life in the camp, as they were far from the front lines of war. The prisoners held in camps like this were a diverse mix. Among them were regular army soldiers, black shirts, conscripts and even some Navy personnel. Interestingly, some of these men had never even fired a shot before they were captured. A significant number of Italian prisoners of war arrived after Italy's surrender in 1943, making their situation even more complex. They were no longer fighting for the Axis, but they were still treated as prisoners. Many of these men came from desert camps in Egypt or overcrowded facilities in India before being transported to Australia. Already disorientated by the chaos of war, only to find themselves in a strange distant land. You know, when you think about it, living here as a prisoner of war was not really such a bad thing, because at least here you had a roof over your head, you had a bed to sleep in, you got 3 meals a day. Yeah, sure, it was basic living, but at least nobody was shooting at you. You had a better chance of survival here than you did on the Eastern Front or anywhere like that. I mean, here, your biggest concern was whether you're going to get bitten by a dugite or something like that. Now the plan was that after the war, the people from the camps were all going to get sent back to their original countries. Trouble was, most of them didn't want to go. They had nothing for them back in their old countries. They wanted to stay here, they'd made friends here. Now some deals were done with some people where they could stay because they could get employment locally on farms and things like that, but a lot of them had to leave to go back again. But at their first opportunity they got a boat and they came back and emigrated to Australia. When you visit places like this, it's easy to just see some bushland with a few concrete blocks scattered around and think big deal. But if you stop and think about what life was like 80 years ago, you get a different perspective, especially if you imagine it through the eyes of a prisoner of war. Think about it. You've been taken from everything familiar. Where you come from has fallen, and you're forced into a war made to kill people you'd never met, with no personal quarrel. It's a brutal cycle of survival, kill or be killed. When you're captured, you're put on a boat and shipped off to a place you might never have heard of, landing here in the middle of nowhere. Imagine arriving here in summer. The heat reaches 40 degrees and you're stuck in a prison camp out in the bush. Sure, maybe you get to work locally, make a friend or two, but then there are the locals who see you as the enemy, staring at you suspiciously like you're from another planet, just because you're Italian or German. Now flip the story. From the local perspective, these are foreigners, prisoners from the war who worked on your farms or in your factories. You don't trust them, they're the enemy. Yet over time, some people start to think that they're not so different after all. They're people just like everyone else, only they speak a different language. Friendships start to form, and that wall of mistrust begins to crumble. So yeah, maybe it is just concrete blocks in the bush, but it's the story behind these blocks and the people who once walked here that make places like this important. They help us remember so that we're less likely to take the dark path again. And when you think about it, there are people around the world right now living this very same reality. Well, there we go, that brings us to an end to this video. We are from here, we're going to head back down to Pinjarra and go to the bakery for lunch. We're only about an hour or so out of home. So in our next part of this series, we're going to be coming back to Darling and starting from Darling and then heading south to, well, we don't know where, but we're sort of heading in a Collie direction. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more from it, then hit the subscribe button down there as well. But until next time, happy travels.